Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is another presentation of Non-Linear Existentialism, Heidegger and Satre, the duality of being including time and nothingness as interpreted within the context of neuronal energetics. Table of contents, basically review this, but the gist of the entire presentation is just showing how close a relationship between existentialism and non-linear existentialism using Heidegger and Sartre, which are two of the cornerstones, the fathers basically of existentialism, and just showing how closely their terminology is to nonlinear existentialism if you use the terminology and the theories of nonlinear existentialism, basically taking the ideas of existentialism, that the ontology of the being of the individual is a result of the interaction between the environment and the individual, as opposed to some definable substance, deity, God, whatever you want to call it, external to the process of the intimate relationship between the environment and the individual. I'm going to be doing this through selective quotations from Being in Time as well as Being in Nothing. Frequency amplitude modulation, frequency modulation of time, and amplitude modulation, cognitive variation, which you can also be referred to as being. The three parts of nonlinear existentialism. Cognitive development of a person depends on the bidirectional flow of energy, and it's a preset frequency in the CNS, and that's going to be time. And then cognitive development, variation, indeterminate, non-linear, and the overview of nonlinear existentialism is the levels of cerebral energy changes with time. The endpoint is residual incongruence is equal basically to zero. These are going to be some of the terms I use for existentialism, and they can be defined within the context of non-linear existentialism. Subject is central point of reference. Then you have secondary points of reference. Then you have being, which is very important, which have quantity as well as quality. Quantity is going to be that external standards, and they're known, and unknown internal standards are considered to be qualities. Existence, the environmental sources of energy by which being is developed. Being in itself, a physical process within a subject which allows it to differentiate itself from the environment in terms of quality, and ability to differentiate the in itself from the environment, thereby creating the illusion of independence from the environment. Uncertainty, scientific term, basically what at present is not known or cannot be known given the circumstances. That can apply to quantity as well as quality. Then variance, which is very important, that you can have a range of possible outcomes, but within that range you're not sure of what the outcome will be, and that can be considered quality, which is very central to the idea of nonlinear existentialism, that you would have the V1B theoretically being emitting a magnetic source, and that magnetic source, because it's set by a known frequency within the cerebral cortex, produces time, and because that magnetic force also interacts with the neurons in the area, it also causes variation in the outcome, which is going to be more towards the idea of frequency modulation, amplitude modulation. Heidegger, won't go into this specific ones, but I'm just bringing these up to see it in view of nonlinear existentialism and see how closely the different theories are. Basically, for Heidegger, through the next 5 slides, he goes into the idea of time being essential, a central point of what being is. So being is something that cannot be known, is indefinable. Then you would have Dasein, which is basically an emissary almost of being, and that's going to be basically us, or a very central part of us. It's a being that can actually be ontically realized, externalized, and that's going to be basically something that is an indication that being is actually occurring. And through this, being a term in which is purely expression of its being. So Dasein and being are very tightly integrated with each other. And please read this through, but again, there's a tight relationship between being, Dasein being time. And this one is a very important quote. I won't read it, but please see it within light of nonlinear existentialism, and also this point that Dasein's everydayness is not nothing. which will lead me into Satre, basically the idea that whereas Satre believes in the nothingness, I believe that in some ways Heidegger is very close again. When he said Dasein's everydayness is not nothing, he's talking about time. When Sartre is talking about it, he's not talking about time per se. He's talking about the next stage. And if you look at non-linear existentialism, it's going to be basically the amplitude modulation, which could be seen as nothing, but it is not a nothing. So Sartre, very interesting here, he talks about the idea of the infinite and the finite. And I would argue this is very much like the ideas that come forth. If you look at non-linear existentialism, you have energy emitting source, and that's finite, and it can also produce an infinite through the relationship between the non-linearity that's produced by the information coming in the system and being varied by the physical processes within non-linear existentialism. He then goes on the idea of what the inner self is. He has a question of negation, further with negations, and then it further goes to the idea of the relationship between the in itself and the for itself. And I think this is very intimately towards non-linear existentialism. The in itself is going to be the energy emitting source, and then the energy itself can be considered a nothing because the thing is it's indeterminate. But just because it's indeterminate does not make it's a nothing. But it's nothing in itself in respect that it cannot be defined. So in view of this, we can see the energy coming into the individual and being varied, and the variance leads to better outcomes, leads to survival as being a good thing. But the thing is, we look at nothingness as an idea, as an abstraction, it can lead to contradictions. So the thing is that yes, there is a separation from the in itself, which can be being of the individual, a process unique to the individual. It does not get changed because, as mentioned in non-linear existentialism, the interaction is basically from V1b, the energy emitting source, to the cortex. However, it is not from the cortex back because the V1b layer is separated from it itself, does not get varied. So being the energy emitting source is not varied, and through emitting a source that causes variance, and the variance is undefined, it leads itself very much into the idea of what Satre is talking about. And this, I really think someone needs to just think about that idea and see it throughout the works of Satre and also Heidegger. So, in conclusion of this one is being is dualistic. As that which produces energy or allows the system to accept energy, it does not change the energy emitting source. As the energy which is produced, it does change, it does have variance. Not changed being is time. Constant frequency generation allows for regulated neuronal input. Change being is nothingness. Amplitude generation produces variation in neuronal input, thereby creating a non-linearity which as an abstraction can appear to be nothingness. This, I think anyone who's familiar with either one of the works has to look at it in a more physical, more practical, more realistic sense of what do they actually mean. Being in time for Heidegger was the idea that we have being, and the being lends itself to producing time, and through time we can interact with the environment, and that can lead to the ideas that he talked about later on, falling, of anxiety and such. And this idea of time is not a nothingness because it is realized, and one has to have it in order to interact with the environment. Then you go to being and nothingness, and even though Satre realizes that we do interact with a reality, there is a reality, he gets into the idea of nothingness, and he talks about the swirling, and I don't like to use the word uncertainty, and swirling effect that separates us from the environment, and we can never be part of the environment. But the thing is, I would object to that one because the swirling isn't necessary, and the thing is, the more the swirling allows us to separate ourselves from the environment, and I've talked about this in the self-lying function, is that if you look at it from the time that you have independence, and this nothingness is a way of getting the being for itself, or this independence, that through residual incongruencies to going towards zero, The self-line function, which can be seen in other presentations, goes back towards the line and then goes actually towards nothing. So the uncertainty, anxieties, and angst, as it were, if you look in the full context, can be removed. But if you look at it as that one moment in time, and if it's earlier along in the process and things have been uncertain in the environment, yes, there's going to be a higher amount of residual incongruencies, but in an overall effect, the nothingness will not vanish, because it's always going to be there, because it's going to be an aspect of time, but it's going to be the creation, the thing that allows for the being to occur, will still be there, but the anxiety, the negation, and such that he talks about will basically become less and less. So the noise that's created by it will become less and less as an overall effect, even though the actual energy is still there. But I would still say, please see this in a different light. And that's why I do have concerns about philosophy per se, because it does talk about uncertainties and such, but the things it puts it into a context which allows many people to take it too far, to go that because life does at one point not have a specific nature, a specific situation, and there's so much responsibility that, in a greater context, it's actually great a bit different than at that singular time. I think people really got to see it in the grand scheme of things. But hopefully through looking at both the existentialist writers and through seeing it with non-linear existentialism in the background, hopefully be brought into the foreground and give more of a contextual thoughts towards existentialism. But I thank you very much for your time. Please consider it, and please read those quotations. I have not paraphrased, because I believe great works have to be considered on their own, but I can also want to suggest that there are a lot of contradictions that occur because of these abstractions. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.